Peace. Islam. Sheekamauga Alamassee-El. Coming at y'all live. Deep down. Moorish-Arabian country. Coming at y'all live from Kasihta. You know what I'm saying? The old Mekasuki town of Kasihta. So-called Kasihta. So-called Georgia. And, just passing through. Wanted to kind of, as we add to the dismantling of the fake slave narrative. And we starting to give power back to the Mississippian blood, to the Mississippian bloodline, young bloods, peace blood, all that, the real blood, you know what I mean? As we travel, a lot of, again, when you get out here and travel, make sure y'all check out a lot of these markers because it really has your history on these markers. That's why they're slowly disappearing and they're slowly kind of redoing history because they rocked a lot of our people to sleep in these schools with entertainment and all type of nonsense. The books and all the history has always been right in your face. But they kind of forced that silly, goofy demonstration on a lot of y'all. And y'all walking around looking, acting real European, suits and ties all hella watered down. You know what I'm saying, with your jeans and shirts and goofball suits and all that. Y'all, and people have always been laughing at you because your history is just right here. You know what I mean? But we giving that power back to the blood. You know what I'm saying? What up, blood? The real young blood. You know what I'm saying? The real young and old blood. You dig? So we're gonna read this marker and just check out the implications of it. So it says, this marker. Check out the marker. Kasihta. Okay, and let's do the knowledge to Kasihta. I mean, your culture's always been in the blood, man. I mean, who would have a name like Kasihta? You might know somebody with a kind of a variable of that name now, but Kasihta, I mean, come on, man. That's a Mississippian name, you know what I mean? But anyway, so let's read the marker. So Kasihta, the peace town of the Lower Creeks, one of the two great Muskogee towns in the Creek Confederation of Indians. The Creek Confederation of Moors is what they mean. You know what I'm saying? Because you had, again, when you was in your Moorish Barbary demonstration, you had your own towns. You had your own jurisdiction. They could not mess with, they had to deal with you as a foreigner. They had to deal with you like you were in a foreign nation. So towns like Kasihta were old Moorish towns that had their own sharifs. They had their own economy. They had their own business districts. They had their own everything in the Barbary Moorish demonstration. That's all it is. Again, it's no different from having a Chinatown, a Greek town, a Mexican town, or whatever. You just had your own Moorish towns. And Kasihta was one of those towns. You know what I mean? Because the majority of the so-called mainland North America, all through the 1600s, the 1700s, all the way up to about 1832, and really all the way up to 1865, it was majority Moorish, Muslim. It was not all of this Catholic and all this new school Christian stuff. It just wasn't. It's no knocking to those demonstrations, but we just dealing with facts here. You know what I'm saying? So the majority of the land, the interior, it was Moorish Barbary. That's just what it was. So you would have towns like Kasihta, who were independent towns with their own jurisdictions. So check it out. Okay, so Kasihta, the peace town of the Lower Creeks, was one of the two great Muskogee towns in the Creek Confederation of Indians. Stood on the site of the general's headquarters at Fort Benning. Kasihta, mentioned in the narrative of De Soto's expedition in 1540. And we already talked about De Soto's expedition and how they did a military invasion of the Southeast and got they ended up getting defeated, but they did do a lot of damage before they ended up getting defeated in 1541 in the Mississippi area. But what we got? De Soto's expedition of 1540. Kasihta was burned by the Spaniards under Mateos, commander of the post at Appalachia, in 1686 at a site on the Chattahoochee River. Then the Kasihta, with other Lower Creeks tribes, moved to the Ocmulgee River to be near the English traders, but after the Yamasee War, moved to this site where they remained until 1836. Known to have been one of the oldest and most important towns of the lower creeks, Kasihta Township, according to the census of 1832-1833, had 1,918 residents. So okay, yet another blow to the face of slave narrative. They just told you that Kasihta, the so-called creeks were in Kasihta until 1836. Now this is deep in so-called the current state of Georgia, till 1836. That literally would leave 24 years to 1860 in the Civil War. How in the hell would they have been able to run all them slaves down here between 1836 and 1860? And we already know. Everybody, when they say that they stayed here until 1836, they stay here, they still here. The Creeks and the Miccosukee, the Muskogee people are still here. The only thing that happened at this time when they say the Creeks left at 1836 was complete Moorish Barbary jurisdiction was dissolved in 1836 in this particular town and other towns around here. That's all it means. The same people stayed and the culture remained intact. They didn't stop dealing with the Muslim culture until they were forced after the Civil War. And a lot of them, again, them Christian re-education schools and them contraband camps. That's when you stop seeing people acting like Muslims. But when it says this was a part of the Creek, this was a Creek town, that means it was a Muslim town. It was a Barbary town. So you would have saw brothers walking around this town back in those days when the Muslims had jurisdiction over this town, lawful, legal, international jurisdiction over this particular town. You would have seen brothers walking around in turbans, sisters walking around with their head wrapped, dressing like Muslims. That's just the difference. You had to deal with Muslim law in this particular town. That jurisdiction was gone. Again, they just told you, between 1832 and 1836, that's the only thing that changed. So you still might have been walking around in your garbs and everything. Walking around in the garbs and that wasn't completely outlawed and done away with until 1865. But you would have still been walking around in your garbs and everything. You just had to submit to, around that time, you might have had to submit to like Georgia state laws or something like that. So you couldn't just deal with everything in the Barbary custom anymore and run everything from a Barbary perspective. So that just goes to show you right there. So Kasihta, and Kasihta is a sister's name. Let's just keep it 100. It's in your blood. Kasihta was a Barbary town until 1836. That means there was no, you know what I'm saying? There were no slaves here. It didn't happen. The only slaves, and when they say slaves, these are people who ceased to be Muslim and they wanted to integrate. So when you gave up your customs, if you were one of these people, these silly people, that wanted to give up your customs and you wanted to go assimilate and be a part of the other society or whatever, you was gonna find yourself kind of in an inferior state to the people who were, you know what I mean, to certain people they were trying to elevate in that demonstration. So you used to be a Muslim, you look like me or something, but then you coming in to be a so-called citizen, and now you want to go to their functions and their things. You're gonna find yourself being discriminated against, talk too crazy and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Because these people know, first of all, you're outside of yourself, and they know that if they walk outside of their little protected zone back in those days, and they run into a brother like me, they probably gonna get slapped. They probably gonna get slapped up or something like that. So they would take their frustration, because they couldn't deal with a brother like a real red stick or the likeness. They would take their frustration out on lames and squares, like a lot of y'all who didn't want to be Muslim or Yahudi no more, and y'all wanted to assimilate. So then y'all felt yourself being discriminated against, and that's what you're talking about. Y'all are the slave people. The only slaves in these times were the people who wanted to assimilate and didn't want to deal with the Barbary situation no more. So that's in a nutshell. And there were people in bondage. There were people who had indentures. There were people who, dealing with criminals, trespassers, people who got caught in a lot of the wars and raids and stuff like that. There were people who were in bondage. But it's no different from being in jail, being in a prison camp. That's all that was happening in the South, because in the South, we just didn't play around. You couldn't just do whatever you wanted to do. You would get locked up and put to work, put the hard labor. That's Old Testament culture. That's all it is. So, just doing an knowledge to that, man. Another thing that's interesting on here was it talked about how, there's another thing y'all can research to see how gangster the Muslims and the Moes were. You know what I mean? You can research, it said, because again, in Florida, in so-called Florida, they had a lot of so-called Spanish missions, even though they had no jurisdiction over the Moes in Florida all through the South, because again, we shut them down in 1541. They couldn't do anything. All they could do was build their little missions and their outposts and forts all over Florida and even up into Georgia a little bit, because it's just international politics. You know, you can you can have your fort, you can have an embassy, you can do all this stuff. But these so-called Spaniards, again, a lot of these people look like us. They look like a Puerto Rican or something like that. But these Spaniards, this new demonstration, Spaniard demonstration, yeah, they had their little situations. They set up their missions all over Florida, you know, and they could operate how they wanted to operate. But the majority of the interior was still Muslim, was Mo, and they couldn't really deal with us. They couldn't do anything with us. You know what I'm saying? So this particular situation where it was a disagreement, Mateos came and burned this particular town. He was a so-called Spaniard commander. He led an army up here, which was mainly other Muslims that was allied with them people up from Florida. And you know, they did a little expedition and they burned Kasihta. Well, check it out. That whole situation, you know, because, you know, Spanish, I get a lot of them people probably still salty because, you know, we wasn't really with all the conversion and all that and letting them get no sway, because Muslims ain't converting to nothing. We're not assimilating to nothing. Never have, never will. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, they sent an expedition up here. 1686, and what this resulted in them getting completely pretty much ran out of the current state of Florida and everything, because and when they say the English, they were coming up here looking for the English. They're just talking about our Muslim alliance with our Yahudi people in Great Britain, because we had a beef with the so-called Roman Catholics because they wanted to do some new stuff and we old school. So they were talking about they're coming up here for the British. No, they was coming up here trying to, they were coming up here still starting stuff, still, you know, because they were still salty from getting towed up in the 1500s. They were still coming up here, still starting stuff, trying to see if they could do a last ditch effort to get some sway with us. You know what I mean? So they did a few expeditions up here, but this particular expedition, this resulted in us retaliating on them. And you can look in there, I think in 1702 they had the Battle of Blankets or something like that on the Flint River. When we pretty much mobbed up the Muslims, the Mekasuki, the Moes. We mobbed up on them Spanish, and we ran all the way into Florida, and we tore all their missions down. It resulted in like a siege of St. Augustine, you know what I'm saying, which is an old Moorish fort. Don't get it messed up. It resulted in like a siege of St. Augustine, and pretty much them Spaniards, them Catholics, and them people got ran all out of Florida, all in the 1700s. By the Moes, you know what I'm saying? Because they never learn. Them people never learn. They always coming up here thinking that they gonna get some sway. And like I said, these are still, we related to some of these people too, but they are just not. They don't want to be Muslim. They're not like us, and they really be feeling like they can turn us into what they are, and it never happens. Just like the other people do, but just do the knowledge on how the Spanish still was spit. They was sending. The Appalachia and these people in Florida were allied with the Spanish, still coming up here with the nonsense, with the Catholic nonsense, and ultimately we shut them all the way down in Florida in the 1700s. And they'll tell you at the Battle of Blankets that the so-called Mekasuki, the Mekasuki, they did a raid on us, and we did a counter raid on them. And they'll try to talk about how the British had armed us and we were armed to the T. They said the so-called Indians were armed to the T, like they was just ready. They had guns. They was militaried up. You know what I'm saying? And they try to act like the British gave us. Man, again, the Moors invented rifles. We invented guns. We've always been well armed. Don't get it messed up. But they said that the Moors in South Georgia, around the Flint River, were armed to the T, the so-called Indians, and they mollywopped them Spanish, and we started running down into Florida, and like again, it resulted in the last ditch effort, resulted in like a siege of St. Augustine, and resulted in them Spaniards pretty much getting ran out of Florida. You know what I'm saying? But you know, because you already know that the Mekasuki and the Seminoles was running Florida all the way up until again like 1840. So we already know about that and how they, you know, they pretty much destroyed the United States Army. They came down there with that nonsense. You know what I'm saying? But that's how the Spanish continuing to come up here starting stuff. The Spaniards, the Catholics, they got ran out of Florida, always thinking they can bring smoke to the Muslims. You know what I'm saying? To the Americans. Just stop. You know what I'm saying? Over and over again, we gotta show these clowns what's up. The Muslims don't play. But anyway, just doing the knowledge to Kasihta, old Moorish town, still here, still mostly Mississippian. The people are still here. So, you know, just doing knowledge to your history. And again, this marker tells you that they were here. The Moors, the Mekasuki, were here until 1836, and they still stayed after that. It's just the Barbary jurisdiction, the official legal jurisdiction, was dissolved in 1836. That's all they're telling you. So anyway, and also, you know, they mentioned the Yamasee War as well. You know, and we're gonna do the knowledge to the Yamasee War and all that, because that's again, the Yamasee War never stopped. That war pretty much continued all the way up to 1865 with us, you know, putting a lot of these goofies in their place, trying to sit up here and try to convert the Muslims. It's just not gonna happen. Even to this day, a lot of brothers and sisters, so-called hoods, the hood niggas, still carry that spirit. You know what I'm saying? You know, just because you got a lot of lames that sat up here and went corporate, and then a lot of them lames, them people and the elders and people with that demonstration, they always wonder why their kids rebel against them. You know what I'm saying? Like, they got these jobs and these nice jobs and all that stuff, and they want to be all in, you know, their so-called church and all of that, but they wonder why they lose the youth. Man, again, our ancestry is Yahudi and fighting Muslim. Understand, the youth will always have that in their DNA. So y'all sitting up here trying to be all lame and square, you know what I mean, with your little corporate demonstration and your good job, and then you wondering why you have no sway with the youth. They are fighters. You know what I'm saying? It's in their blood. They warriors, it's in their blood. So you lames and you clowns will never have no sway. You know what I mean? You assimilated, you gave everything up, and the youth will never listen to y'all. So just go ahead and get out the paint with that, and let's pass the torch to the real ones. But that's peace, tapping in with y'all live from Kasihta in Arabian country. I'll tap back in with y'all later. Peace.